15 years of sacrifice ended with my sons. Telling a judge their stepdad was their real dad. Their adoption legally erased their $2 million trust fund, and I let the money revert to me while they celebrated their betrayal. Hey Reddit, I, 48 male, spent 15 years raising my 2 sons alone, doing everything I could to give them a future. Then one day, they stood in court and chose another man over me. What they didn't realize is that their choice set off a chain of events none of us could have predicted. Let's just say, it didn't end the way they thought it would. You don't raise kids for 15 years alone expecting them to spit in your face, but that's exactly how it went down. Harry was 17, Theo 16. I was the one who got up at 5 in the morning, packed their lunches, sat through those boring school concerts, and worked 2 jobs so they didn't go without. Their mom? She bailed early on and came back later with her upgrade, some clown named Pete, who walked around like he invented fatherhood. And where do we end up after all those years? Family court. I'll never forget sitting there on those stiff benches. My boys sat across from me, both wearing those dumb grins that teenagers have when they think they've outsmarted everyone. Next to them was my ex-wife, all smug, like she'd just won the lottery. Pete had his arm draped over the back of the bench like he owned the place. The judge hadn't even walked in yet, and I could see her leaning close to Harry and Theo, whispering like a coach drawing up a last-minute play. Her lips moved quick, and Harry nodded. Theo laughed under his breath, like the whole thing was a joke. That was the first punch in the gut. They weren't even nervous. It was like they'd rehearsed betraying me. The judge finally came in and asked the basic stuff. Harry, Theo, are you sure about this adoption? Do you understand what it means? Harry straightened up like he was giving a speech. Yes, Your Honor. Pete is the real father in our lives. He's shown us what being a dad actually means. I swear my ears rang. Real father? I wanted to stand up and scream, who stayed up with you when you had a fever? Who took double shifts so you'd never miss Christmas presents? But I didn't. I sat there, jaw tight, because I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Then it was Theo's turn. And this kid, man, he pulled something from his pocket, and I instantly recognized it. A photo. One of the old ones I kept in the living room. The 3 of us at the park when he was like 8. I'd thought it went missing months ago. He held it up, ripped it clean down the middle, and let it drop right onto my lap without saying a word. Then he walked across the courtroom and stood by Pete like it was nothing. I can't explain the kind of silence that falls inside your chest when your own son does something like that. It's not loud. It's not even painful at first. It's just empty. The judge banged the gavel. Adoption approved. That's it. 15 years of my life erased in less than 2 minutes. My boys ran to Pete like he was some hero. He wrapped them up in his arms, grinning at me over their shoulders like he'd just won a championship. My ex-wife leaned into him, eyes glinting with victory. I left without saying a word. Walking out of that courthouse felt like leaving a funeral, except the casket was my own damn effort. When I got home, the place felt too quiet. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. For years, I'd kept a separate account tucked away. Every double shift, every weekend job, I saved what I could. The number glared at me. $447,000. That was the nest egg. The proof that I wasn't cheap, just smart. Money meant to help them through college, weddings, life. Now it just sat there, mocking me. I told myself I should be angry, but I wasn't. Not yet. I was hollow. Like someone had scooped me out and left me staring at 4 walls that felt less like home and more like a cage. But somewhere in the middle of all that emptiness, I felt it. A little flicker. Not hope, not sadness. Something sharper. Because if they thought I was going to roll over and disappear, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I laid there on the couch for hours that night. My phone buzzed a couple times with work emails, 1 spam text, but nothing from Harry or Theo. Not even a sorry dad. Figures. I should have expected that. My head was spinning with numbers, like it always did when I didn't want to think about emotions. That's kind of how I'd survived being a single dad all those years. And then I remembered something. My dad. Their grandfather. He wasn't rich, but he was old school smart with money. Before he passed, he set up a trust fund for Harry and Theo. The whole point was to make sure they had something waiting for them when they hit college. I'd never touched it. Not a dime. Even when things got tight, that fund was off limits. Sacred. So, lying there in that hollow pit of a night, I started thinking, what happens to that trust now that they're not legally my sons anymore? I didn't know the answer, but one guy would. William. He was more than just our lawyer. He'd known me since I was a kid, back when I still had scraped knees and didn't hate the word family. He'd been my dad's friend before he was mine. If anybody could tell me straight, it was him. I called him the next morning. My voice cracked when I told him what went down in court. He didn't sound surprised. Son, I'm sorry, he said. I warned you your ex-wife was maneuvering. Forget her, I said. I need to know about the trust. Dad's fund. What happens to it now? There was a pause on the line. Too long. My stomach twisted. William, don't hold out on me. Finally, he sighed. Your father. He was sharper than you thought. Your dad set up a reversion clause. He wrote that if Harry and Theo ever stopped being your legal dependents, the trust wouldn't stay with them. It would revert back to you as the remainder beneficiary. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, not breathing. Say that again. It's yours now. $2 million. No strings attached. He didn't trust your ex-wife to manage it. He assumed if the boys ever walked away from you, they didn't deserve it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall. $2 million. Plus the $447,000 I'd already saved. $2,447,000 sitting in reach. My father, even from the grave, had seen through all of this. For the first time since court, I smiled. Not a big smile, not joy. Just a small, sharp grin. They thought they upgraded? They thought the broke stepdad with leased cars and credit debt was their golden ticket? They had no clue they just signed away their entire future. I thanked William and promised I'd come by for the official paperwork later in the week. After hanging up, I grabbed the safe out of the closet. Inside was a binder with every password, every bank login, every emergency plan I'd ever made. I opened my accounts and stared at the numbers stacking up. It didn't feel real. Still, the anger wasn't gone. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. So I dug into the closet again and found Theo's old MacBook. He'd used it during his first years of high school before he begged me for something newer. I'd kept it, half thinking I'd wipe it and use it as a backup. I flipped it open, logged in, and damn if his iCloud account wasn't still connected. The messages started popping up. Photos, group chats, years of history, and what I read made me realize just how far my ex-wife had gone to poison them. He only cares about money, not us. That's why he's always working. Other dads take their kids on trips. He just makes us stay home because he's tight with cash. It's embarrassing when he drops us off in that beat-up car. Everyone stares. Harry. I don't want him showing up at my games. He'll just make me look lame. Theo. Pete actually knows how to treat us. Mom says that's what being a real dad looks like. Years of sacrifice, flipped and twisted into failures. They saw as humiliation. And their mom? She was the architect of it, feeding them that line over and over, painting me as the villain, Pete as the savior. I closed the laptop and just sat there, hands gripping the edge of the desk. For years, I thought I was raising them alone. Turns out, I'd been fighting a ghost war the whole time. But now I had something I hadn't had before. Leverage. They thought they stripped me of my title as father. What they really did was hand me a fortune. And if Pete was already flashing cars and trips he couldn't afford, then this trust fund was the prize he was aiming at. He wanted the money. My ex wanted the money. And my sons? They'd sold themselves cheap because they thought the grass was greener. Well, guess what? The grass on that side is fake, and I was about to start pulling it up by the roots. I didn't have to wait long to see the first cracks. A week after the adoption hearing, Harry texted me a photo of him and Theo at some trendy restaurant, holding up steaks the size of their heads. The caption, "Real dad takes us outright." I saved the photo. Receipts. Funny thing though, what they didn't know was that 2 nights later, I just happened to be at that same place with a coworker. Long story short, a client dinner got moved last minute, and we ended up there. Halfway through my meal, I saw Pete at a table near the bar, puffing up his chest like he owned the place. He had Harry and Theo with him again. The boys looked proud, like royalty being paraded around. But when the check came, I watched the waiter run Pete's card. Swiped once, declined, swiped again, declined. The waiter leaned in and whispered something. Pete forced a laugh and pulled out another card. Declined again. His face went from smug to pale real quick. Harry glanced at Theo, whispering something, but Pete covered it with a fake smile. It's the machine. Happens all the time. Eventually, he slunk off to the ATM across the street, leaving the boys sitting there awkwardly. He came back 10 minutes later with cash, over-tipping like he was proving a point. The whole scene was pathetic. I didn't say a word to them that night, just filed it away in my mental folder labeled Pete, fraud. A few days later, I got a call from William's accountant buddy. I'd asked him to quietly dig into Pete's finances. The guy didn't even try to sugarcoat it. Your ex's husband is screwed. He owes around $400,000 to private lenders. Business is bankrupt. He's juggling loans just to keep the lights on. Honestly, I don't know how he's not in collections already. That explained the showboating. The leased cars, the fancy dinners, the Audis for the boys' 18th nonsense. It was all smoke and mirrors. The man wasn't rich, he was drowning. And if I knew Pete, he was about to start looking for lifeboats. I didn't want to tip my hand too early, so I let it play out. Sure enough, a couple days later, I got a WhatsApp video from Harry. He and Theo were standing next to a red Audi, grinning like idiots. Look what Dad's getting us for our birthdays. One each. Finally, someone who doesn't humiliate us. They looked so smug I almost laughed. The car wasn't even his. The plate still had the dealership logo. I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. Nothing more. Let them stew in their own arrogance. What they didn't know was that the accountant's report had already told me the truth. Pete couldn't even keep his own business afloat, much less buy 2 sports cars. So the question was, where was he planning on getting the money? That's when I thought of Hunter, my ex's dad. I hadn't spoken to him in a year, not since my ex had started keeping Harry and Theo away from him. I still had his number, though. I called. Hunter, it's Sean. There was silence, then a tired sigh. I knew you'd call one day. How are my grandsons? Not my sons anymore, I said bitterly. And I told him everything. The adoption, the court, the boys running off with Pete. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then his voice came back, trembling with anger. That bastard. Do you know why she kept them from me? Because she knew I would see through him. Do you know how much he owes me? $60,000. I lent it to him 2 years ago to save his worthless business. He promised me he'd pay me back. Never saw a cent. I gripped the phone tighter. 60 grand? You're kidding. That's not all. His tone dropped. 5 years ago, he faked a workplace accident. Insurance fraud. My daughter helped him forge medical documents. I still have copies of everything. She asked me to store them at my house. I kept them. I sat there stunned. You've got proof? I've got a box full of it, he said. Receipts, papers, everything. I was quiet because she's my daughter. But now? They took my grandsons from me for this con man. No more silence. That box was dynamite. After the call, I sat back in my chair and thought about the chessboard. Pete was leveraged up to his neck. My ex had tied herself to him, convincing Harry and Theo that he was some hero while painting me as the stingy villain. The boys were bragging about cars that didn't exist. Meanwhile, I had proof he was broke. Proof he owed family money. And soon enough, proof he was a fraudster. They thought they cut me out of their lives and their future. What they really did was step into a collapsing house and lock the door behind them. And I was standing outside with the matches. That was the moment I decided this wasn't going to be a quiet grudge. I'd spent 15 years being the guy who swallowed everything and just kept working, kept saving, kept proving myself with actions no one wanted to see. If they thought the adoption was the end of me, they were dead wrong. I wasn't ending. I was staging a show. Not a show in some rented ballroom where they'd strut around like royalty. That would have been too easy for them, too impersonal. No, this was going to happen in the same house they called embarrassing. The same living room where Harry used to roll his eyes at my spreadsheets, and Theo used to complain that our couch wasn't modern enough. If they were going to mock my life, then my life was going to be the stage where they fell apart. So I called my ex. I want to host a dinner, I told her flatly. A farewell party for the adoption. A proper send-off. You, the boys, Pete, some close family. One night to make it official. She hesitated, probably waiting for me to crack. Wow, she finally said. You're finally accepting reality? About time. Just make it nice, Sean. Not one of your cheap cookouts. Something respectable. I bit down a laugh. Don't worry. It'll be something they'll never forget. That night, I sat at my desk making 2 lists. The first one was for her eyes. A handful of cousins, a neighbor or two, a few friends. Safe names. The second was the real list. Pete's old business partner he owed money to, a couple of creditors who'd been circling, and of course, Hunter. I knew she'd edit the official list and think she was in control, while I quietly sent out the invitations she didn't know about. Then came the setup. I pulled the old projector out of the closet and pointed it at the living room wall. Perfect. Crisp enough that no one could say they didn't see the truth. I started building slides like a lunatic. Page after page of my overtime hours logged, my tuition payments, the balance of my savings account, and the pièce de résistance, a scan of the college trust fund clause. Bold, highlighted, unavoidable. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was an execution. A few days later, I got a package at my door. No return address. Inside were framed photos I hadn't seen in months. Me with Harry and Theo at the beach, Christmas mornings, Little League games. On top was a note in Harry's messy handwriting. Go ahead and hold on to the scraps. The future belongs to us, not you. I stood there in my kitchen staring at it. I'd thought the ripped photo in court was low, but this was deliberate. They'd actually boxed up my fatherhood and shipped it back like unwanted junk. I carried the stack to the fireplace, lit a match, and fed each photo to the flames. Watching them curl into ash didn't hurt like I expected. It felt final, like shutting a door and locking it from my side. That night, instead of wallowing on the couch, I went to the gym. That's where I saw her. Dark hair pulled back, sharp focus, pushing herself hard. She caught me staring once, gave a little nod, then went right back to her set. I didn't even know her name yet. Later, I'd learn it was Elena. But for the first time in years, I realized life might exist outside the wreckage of fatherhood. The closer the dinner got, the more obvious it was that my ex was nervous. She texted me after I sent the guest list. We need to curate this. Some of these names aren't appropriate for a family event. Translation. She'd crossed out every single person who knew the truth about Pete. Perfect. I didn't argue. I just texted back, okay. Let her think she was pulling the strings while I built the trap under her feet. By the end of that week, the house was ready. Living room cleared, chairs borrowed from neighbors, projector tested again and again. My suit hung in the closet, crisp and sharp. The slides were saved in multiple places. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't second-guessing. For the first time since the courthouse, I felt in control. They thought they stripped me of my title as father. What they really did was set the stage for their own unmasking. The matches were ready. All that was left was striking them. But apparently Pete and my ex-wife had the same thought. Only difference? They tried striking first. It started with a phone call. My phone buzzed. And when I saw the name, I almost laughed. Pete. First time he'd ever called me directly. When his name flashed on my screen, I put the call on speaker and set my old phone on the desk to record. I knew whatever came out of his mouth was going to be worth keeping. Hey, Sean, he said, trying too hard to sound casual. Figured we should talk man to man. About what? I asked, already knowing. Look, now that I'm Harry and Theo's father, I need access to their educational accounts. My lawyer says as guardian, I'm entitled to manage the college trust your dad set up. So let's not make this messy. Just give me the info and we'll be good. Quick pause, fellas. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way. Thanks so much for your support. All right, back to the drama. I leaned back in my chair, smirking even though he couldn't see it. That's interesting, because I don't actually know the details. My father handled everything with William, the family lawyer. You'll have to ask him. Silence. Then, sharp. Fine. Give me his number. I gave it to him, hung up, and went about my day. 2 hours later, William called me, laughing so hard I could barely understand him. Son, your ex's husband just rang me, demanding access to the trust. When I explained the clause, that the boys forfeited their rights after adoption, he lost it. He was screaming it was impossible, that he was the legal father now. He sounded like he was about to break something. Good, I said. Let him. The next morning, my ex-wife called. No hello, no pretense. You thief! She shouted into the phone. You stole our son's money. That trust was for them. They're not my sons anymore, I said flatly. Remember? You made sure of that in court. You know what I mean, she snapped. That money was for their education. You're disgusting. I cut her off. No, what's disgusting is pushing them into adoption just to get your hands on that trust. And now you're mad the plan backfired. Don't call me again unless it's through a lawyer. I hung up before she could respond. 2 days later, I realized how far they were willing to go. My neighbor, Mrs. Porter, caught me in the driveway. She's the kind of person who notices everything. Sean, she said, there were people taking pictures of your house yesterday. Not delivery folks either. Clipboards, writing things down. Looked official. I thanked her and brushed it off. But inside, I knew. Something was coming. That afternoon, the knock came. When I opened the door, there was a social worker and a police officer standing on my porch. Mr. Alvarez? The social worker asked. We've received a complaint regarding child abuse and financial neglect. May we come in? My heart raced, but my face stayed calm. Of course. They stepped inside, glancing around like they were checking for traps. The social worker pulled out a file. The complaint alleges you denied basic financial support to minors for years, causing psychological harm. There are signed statements from the boys. She set the file on my table and slid it across. I opened it. Harry's neat handwriting, Theo's sloppier scrawl. Sworn affidavits saying I'd kept them in inhumane conditions, that I'd refused to buy them clothes, that I deprived them financially out of cruelty. The officer frowned. These are serious accusations, Mr. Alvarez. If proven, we're talking about criminal charges. Give me a few minutes, I said, walking upstairs. I came back down carrying a box I'd been saving for years. Every bank statement, every tuition receipt, every medical bill. Neatly organized. I laid them out on the table. Here, I said, private school tuition, paid every semester. Health insurance premiums. On time. Groceries, clothing, extracurriculars. 15 years worth. Documented. The social worker flipped through the files for a solid half hour. Her expression changed from suspicion to disbelief. This clearly shows you provided well above basic support. The officer looked at me. Do you have any idea why your sons would sign affidavits like these? Yes, I said calmly. Because their parents convinced them to. This is about money. A college trust fund they can't touch anymore. Pete tried demanding access, and when that failed, they filed this. I even have proof. I pulled out my phone, tapped a recording. Pete's voice filled the room. My lawyer says as guardian, I have the right to manage the trust. Then his frustration when I told him I didn't know the amount. The officer's eyebrows shot up. That's highly irregular. The social worker closed the file. We'll need to investigate further, but from this perspective, it seems someone is abusing the system for financial leverage. They left 2 hours later, but not before the officer gave me a warning. If this moves forward, they'll probably try to request a restraining order and freeze your assets. Have your paperwork in order. That night, I sat in my office, the glow of the computer screen lighting the room. They weren't just trying to rob me. They were trying to bury me. False accusations, legal tricks, all of it just to claw at money that wasn't theirs anymore. Fine. If that's the game they wanted, I'd take it further. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. One to Harry's future college, one to Theo's. Good morning, I told the financial aid office. I need to formally withdraw my statement of financial support and my guarantee as a co-signer for my son's student loans. The woman on the line sounded surprised. Is there an issue, sir? They're no longer legally my sons, I said evenly. They were adopted by another man. He's responsible for their educational finances now. Also, they recently filed a complaint accusing me of abuse and neglect. That should be noted. There was a long pause. Understood, sir. This will trigger an immediate review of their enrollment. Without verified financial backing, their guardian will be responsible. Perfect, I said. Send him the bill. That afternoon, I sat back in my chair, staring at the clock. My house was spotless, my documents airtight, and my finger was on the trigger. They wanted a war over money. They were about to learn what it's like to lose everything you counted on. The matches weren't just ready anymore. The first flame was lit. By the time the night of the farewell dinner rolled around, my house didn't even look like my house. The living room was cleared out, folding chairs lined in neat rows. The projector aimed at the wall. The air smelled of catered food, nothing fancy, but enough to impress the people who thought I only knew how to grill burgers on a rusty BBQ. I stood in my new suit, cufflinks shining, feeling sharper than I had in years. Elena arrived at my side, dressed simply but elegant, and when she took my arm, I knew I was walking into that night as a man they wouldn't recognize. The doorbell rang. One by one, they filed in. My ex-wife, smug as ever in a glittery dress. Pete, already sweating through his shirt collar. And behind them, Harry and Theo, both looking uncomfortable, like they weren't sure if this was a trap or not. Wow, my ex said, glancing around. You actually tried. I'll give you that, I smiled. Sit anywhere you like. We'll get started soon. They weren't the only ones. Hunter arrived, shaking my hand firmly, eyes locked on Pete like a predator waiting for the right moment. A couple of Pete's creditors slid in quietly, their faces tight with anticipation. I even caught one guy whispering, "Can't wait to see him squirm." Perfect. The food was served first, just to keep the illusion. Conversations hummed around the room, though most people kept sneaking glances at me. They were waiting for whatever reason I'd drag them into this house. Then, right on cue, my ex-wife raised her glass. "Here's to family," she announced, grinning like she'd won. To new beginnings, and to Pete, who stepped up where others failed. The room clapped politely. Harry smirked. Theo nodded along. Pete puffed his chest, soaking in the fake praise. I let the applause die, then stood. "Thanks for that," I said calmly. "But I think it's time we clear up a few things. Since everyone's here to celebrate, let's make sure we know what exactly we're celebrating." The room quieted instantly. I grabbed the projector remote and the first slide lit up on the wall. A spreadsheet of my overtime hours. Line after line, years of late nights and double shifts. For 15 years, I began, I worked 2 jobs. Every cent I could, I put toward raising Harry and Theo. Tuition, healthcare, food, clothes, all documented. Some of you here have called me cheap. Some of you thought I didn't do enough. So let's put the numbers out in the open. The next slide showed my savings account, the $447,000 balance I'd built over years. Gasps rippled through the room. And that was just me. What you didn't know was that their grandfather also set up a college trust fund. $2 million. Locked away for their future. Until the adoption. Click. The next slide showed the adoption decree side by side with the trust clause. The words were highlighted. If the beneficiaries cease to be legal dependents, the funds revert to the biological father. So when Harry and Theo walked into that courtroom and chose adoption, I paused, letting the words hang. They didn't just walk away from me. They walked away from this. Murmurs filled the room. My ex-wife shot up from her chair, red-faced. You stole their money. I turned to her. No, you stole my sons from me. And the money legally came back with me when you did. Pete tried to jump in. That's not how this works. I'm their guardian now. That trust... Funny you say that, I cut him off. Because I have you on recording telling me you wanted access to it. Here's the problem, Pete. You don't get to manage what doesn't exist for them anymore. I hit play on the clip. His voice filled the room. My lawyer says as guardian I have the right to manage the trust. Then the frustration when I told him he had nothing. The room went dead silent. Click. The next slide popped up. Debts. $400,000 to private lenders. A business bankrupt for 6 months. This, I said, pointing at the numbers, is the man my sons traded me for. They thought he was buying them Audis, vacations, a better life. But here's reality. He's drowning in debt. Those cars? I clicked again. A still frame of Harry and Theo's WhatsApp video, bragging next to the red convertible. Dealer plates. Not his. Never was. Theo's face went pale. Harry looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. And then Hunter stood. You also owe me $60,000, you lying bastard, he shouted, slamming a folder on the table. You promised to pay it back. Instead, you scammed me like everyone else. Pete stammered, trying to stand, but his creditors closed in, hemming him at the table. I wasn't done. But debt isn't the worst of it, I said coldly. Click. The final slide lit up. Insurance fraud documents, complete with signatures. 5 years ago, Pete faked a workplace accident. My ex-wife helped him forge medical records. Hunter kept the proof. So when you hear about the abuse allegations they filed against me, understand this is who filed them. A con man and his accomplice. Gasps turned to shouts. Phones came out. People snapping photos of the screen. My ex-wife's face crumbled, tears mixing with fury. Harry muttered, "We didn't know," but nobody listened. The room had turned on them completely. I set the remote down. You freed me from being your father in court. Tonight, I'm freeing you from my wallet. That's all I have to say. I turned, offered my arm to Elena, and together we walked toward the door. Behind me, chaos erupted. Hunter yelling, creditors demanding answers, my ex-wife babbling about lies, Pete trying to push through but getting cornered, and Harry and Theo? They just sat there, frozen in the middle of it all, watching the empire they thought they joined collapse around them. Outside, the night was cool, quiet, almost peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The fire was burning, and I didn't need to stick around to watch them turn to ash. By the next week, the fallout had already started. Pete's creditors didn't wait. They slapped him with lawsuits and froze what little he had. Within weeks, prosecutors filed charges. A few months later, he took a plea deal and got a 2-year sentence for insurance fraud. Hunter handed over the paperwork, prosecutors pounced, and Pete ended up with a 2-year prison sentence. My ex-wife, cornered, cut a deal. She testified against him in exchange for probation, but the damage was done. She walked away with a criminal record that made her unemployable in any serious field. Her social circle thinned out too. The same people she'd flaunted her upgrade to now avoided her like a plague. As for Harry and Theo, reality doesn't care about teenage arrogance. Without the trust fund, and without me co-signing, Harry's college enrollment was canceled before the semester even started. Theo's early admit slot got pulled too once the financial support vanished. When I withdrew backing and the adoption paperwork hit, admissions flagged their files. Without verified support, everything stalled, and that black mark followed them. Other universities didn't want to touch them either. The so-called future Pete promised vanished overnight. So, they got jobs. Harry ended up stocking shelves on the night shift at a supermarket. Theo waited tables at a chain restaurant, serving meals in the same place he used to eat with his friends for fun. They moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment, splitting rent and bills. No cars, no vacations, no fancy clothes, just paychecks that disappeared the second they landed. Months passed before I saw them again. One Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, there they were. Thinner, worn out. Not the cocky kids I'd seen in court. They didn't have the smugness anymore. Just exhaustion and something new in their eyes. Respect, maybe even fear. "Hi, Dad," Harry said, voice shaky. I didn't move. "What are you doing here?" Theo swallowed hard. "We wanted to talk, if you have time." Against my better judgment, I let them in. They sat at the table where I'd once shown the social worker my receipts, only this time they brought their own. Pay stubs, a budget journal, notes on what they'd been doing to survive. "For 8 months, we've been working and thinking," Theo said. "About what we did. About what you did for us." Harry's voice cracked. "We called you cheap when you were working 2 jobs to give us everything. Now we know what it feels like to wake up at 5 and still not have enough. We get it now. They didn't beg. They didn't cry. They just laid out their numbers, their plan, and then Harry said, 'We're not asking for gifts. We're asking for a loan. With interest. We want to earn back the right to be your sons.' I didn't say yes right away. I told them I'd think about it. A week later, I sent them a contract drawn up by William, a formal educational financing agreement. The terms were strict. 3% interest. Maintain a minimum 3.5 GPA. Work at least 20 hours a week. Monthly expense reports. Bi-weekly video check-ins. It wasn't fatherly support anymore. It was business. They signed without even reading the fine print. Meanwhile, I wasn't standing still. I invested the trust money wisely, and in less than a year, between a hot market and a small real estate flip I backed, it grew by another $800,000. I traveled, I lived, I finally did things for myself. The first video call with Theo was surreal. He showed me his grades, all A's. His budget was tight, every dollar tracked. "Thank you for giving us a second chance," he said. "You're earning it," I replied, and I meant it. It wasn't the father-son relationship we once had. It was different, better in a way. No illusions, no entitlement. Respect where there used to be resentment. My ex-wife didn't take it as well. She sent messages for months, most of them blaming me for ruining their lives. The last one simply said, "I hate you." After that, I changed my number. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far, if maybe I'd been too harsh. But then I'd remember Theo's words during the party chaos. "Pete promised us college, cars, trips. He said you were cheap by choice. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision, and they had to live with it." For 15 years, I carried the weight of being their father. Now, I carried nothing. The money was safe, my life was mine. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, I finally understood what freedom really felt like.